Hi, I'm Lynn Coffin, and I'd like to read to you the first story in my collection, The First Honeymoon. This is a story called A Gift Horse, and I'd like to dedicate the reading of this to my friend Marilyn, about whom not enough praises can be given. A Gift Horse. Denise was sure she was right to have said what she did until Leah left for school. Then misgivings rushed upon her, waves cresting into cavalry horses, a soldier on every one. The shop girl smiled again. What was she waiting for? Oh yes, she was supposed to buy something, at least look at something. The counter and showcase were littered with china bric-a-brac. She had come seeking something for Leah, an angel possibly. Leah needed something to take Santa's place, but porcelain figurines weren't right for a 7-year-old girl, even the most careful. What could she have been thinking of? Death. She'd been thinking of death, her impending death. Only it was more as if death had been thinking of her. She hadn't had any medication this morning, wanting her thinking clearer. It was, too, but the pain in her gut had gone crazy. Leah, she began, suppose you were grown up and had a daughter, and you loved the daughter very much, the way I love you. And let's suppose your daughter believed something, and the something made her happy. And the something made her happy, but it wasn't true. Would you tell your daughter the truth? Or would you let her go on believing in the thing that wasn't true, but made her happy? The salesgirl wasn't smiling now. Denise flailed about in her mind, searching for what her mother had called some saving grace. She looked at the girl's white plastic badge. Hello, my name is Beth, said the thick aqua letters. Maybe sometime in the 21st century Leah would be a salesgirl here. No, the imagination was a round-eyed bank teller, and truth produced a 6-shooter and pulled the trigger. The truth was, she would never live to see her daughter grow up. Somewhere inside her, a tumor was growing like topsy. A storm was brewing. It was time to batten down the hatches, only there were no more hatches left. This young woman wanted to please her. No, more than that, she wanted to do right. The beautiful young always did. I love you, Mommy. Are you mad at me? That was Leah these days, and they went over and over the truth as if it were a roll that needed to be memorized. They went over and over what was coming until the future was a stone rolling downhill away from the tomb. And every morning there it was to deal with again. Surprise, surprise, surprise. Leah, sweetheart, I told you this nasty cancer thing isn't because of you. Who's it because of then? Denise waited, afraid to answer too soon before the dust of emotion had settled and truth stood revealed. It's not because of anyone, sweetie. Not you or me or Daddy or anyone. I think it's God, Leah said. I think he did this to you. Why are you looking like that? It's the truth. That's what I think. But why? Am I so bad God has to gun me down? And Leah looked down at her, and there were honest-to-God tears brimming over her lower eyelids. No, Mommy, not you. He's the one that's bad. When I get big, I'm going to tell people not to vote for him. Beth was leaning forward, peering at Denise with a mixture of sympathy and satisfaction, distaste and curiosity. Denise tried to look at her, but it was like looking at someone through smoke or water. The girl had big blue eyes, almost like Leah's. She had blonde brown hair which floated out from the sides of her face. There were spots of color in her cheek, too dramatic and uneven to be anything but natural. Her dark eyebrows had been plucked almost to extinction. Maybe Beth's mother had a thing about facial hair. Oh, but she, Denise, must try to be where she was and not hidden somewhere inside it. She mustn't let death, the fact of it, drive her underground. Leah was counting on her. Richard too, and Beth. Beth, right here, right now, was leaning forward, waiting. Perhaps Beth was an angel in disguise. Denise fished around inside herself and found her voice. She dragged it up to the surface. It was a magic fish with a ring in its mouth. What would it say? I'm sorry, Beth. The words were right, but the tone was wrong, a preface to some important, difficult rite. Denise could see the young husband who would say these words. He would be in his study late one mild winter's night. He would be smoking a pipe. No, forget the pipe. But he would be pacing, unable to look at his shivering wife. I'm sorry, Beth, he would say. I don't know how to go on without you. Excuse me, Beth said. Denise focused on her with a start. Beth had the tonality down flat. When she said, excuse me, the tone let you know she had nothing to be excused for. Maybe Beth was an angel after all, or maybe she was just young and pretty and underpaid. I'm a little spacey these days, Denise heard herself say. The words gave her courage. She picked up a blue china horse the size of a Kleenex box. When you were holding something, people didn't so strongly expect you to talk. No, that was wrong. You didn't so strongly need to talk. That must be it. Denise held the horse up to Beth. It was garish and old-looking, almost unbearably cheerful. How much is this? Beth smiled again. When she smiled, she moved her head a little, and her tiny globe earrings began to swing. Denise felt ice forming under her feet. She was on a playground about to slide. The slide was so long you couldn't see the end. There were boys down there with dogs. She focused on the end of Beth's nose. It was a nice nose with a nice end. Let's go powder our noses, her mother would say when she needed to go to the bathroom. It's on sale for $49, ma'am, Beth said. Part of our Christmas clearance. Denise nodded. Ma'am. Seems like kind of a lot, she said. The conversation was beginning to feel okay, a pair of jeans which had shrunk in the wash. Beth seemed taken aback. It was $69 before the clearance, she said somewhat primly. Denise wanted to take her hands and reassure her. Never mind, she wanted to say. Don't take it personally. Beth reached across the counter and took the horse out of her hands. Look, she said, this is why. She turned the horse so it faced Denise and held it up at eye level. The horse's mouth was wide open in the kind of exaggerated yawn usually associated with hippos. I guess this particular gift horse, Denise began. Beth shook her head as if shaking off flies. No, look inside, she said. Denise took off her so-called reading glasses, took them out of her pocket and put them on. The horse's mouth leapt into sudden focus. And then she saw. The inside of the mouth and all down the throat, as far as the eye could travel, her eye at least, everything had been painted. The primary color was a Pepto-Bismol pink, and not a little jarring. But there were other colors too, and after another visual adjustment, Denise began to make out scenes. The inside of the horse was an unbroken continuum of tiny landscapes, punctuated with tiny houses, tiny trees, and yes, dotted with infinitesimally small people. And Leah looked up at her with those eyes which were not Richard and not Denise, but Leah now, Leah only. I tell her the truth, Mommy, she said, and her lower lip trembled. And when Denise told her, there isn't any Santa Claus, Leah, not really, she didn't make a sound, though tears slid silently down her cheeks, one after the other. She said nothing until she was almost out of the room. Why didn't you tell me he wasn't really real before, she said. Why did you let me believe in Santa Claus all the way until now? Didn't you know? Wow, Denise put the horse down. Her hands had become perpetually cold but sweaty. It was hard to hang on to anything. Beth smiled. Do you like it? She asked, not without a trace of eagerness. The questions of the young were never without a trace of eagerness. It was like a badge for them. Well, Denise paused. She had, as Richard would say, a thing about honesty. She wouldn't lie, even out of kindness. In her opinion, lying was always a mistake. The truth was always what people needed to hear, even when the truth came like a frozen turkey wrapped in blood-stained words like 4 weeks to a year. It's fascinating, she said. I'm not sure I really like it, though. Beth nodded, but looked crestfallen. When she nodded, her badge bobbed up and down. Denise admired the way Beth had pinned it on, right at the very tip of her left breast, so it hung a little over and down into space. It reminded Denise of her mother's favorite story. A man of faith is dangling over a cliff, hanging on by one hand. He calls to God. God says, "If you believe in me, let go." The man responds, "Is there anyone else up there I could talk to?" Beth's disappointment seemed to have modulated into something like sadness. Maybe she hadn't sold anything all morning. Maybe she worked on commission. Maybe her boyfriend made these horses. Maybe Beth, too, was actively dying. Maybe she wasn't real. Denise looked around. They were trying a new medicine. It made her mouth dry. Richard was sitting by her bed. She asked him for water. He poured a glass and held it out to her. When she reached for the water, though, her hand closed on air. There was no glass of water there. Denise looked over at Richard to complain, and he had vanished as well. Later they told her the medicine was a cousin to the stuff glue sniffers sniffed. Hallucinations were one of the many possible side effects. Leah stood in the doorway waiting for an answer, a truthful answer. Of course I knew Santa Claus wasn't real, sweetie. I just didn't realize he was a lie before. Then when I saw what you wrote to him about the reindeer. Beth smiled shyly, about to confess a misdemeanor. Look, she said, I figured this out last night. She took the horse in both hands and gently set it back down on its haunches. It looked absurd but endearing, a horse impersonating a dog, sitting up and begging for biscuits, pathetically eager to please. Denise nodded, but it was like with the cat and MRI scans. She didn't know what she was supposed to see. Once she had been at a dump. She looked around and saw nothing unusual for a dump until Richard pointed it out. On top of the smoldering heap, someone had put an enormous dead boar, all pink and gray and gristle-greasy, a probable casualty of PCB. You let your expectations tell you what to see instead of the other way around, Richard said on the way home. Then he proposed, which really confused her. I don't know what to say, she told him. Do you love me, he asked. Oh, yes, she said, grateful that for once the truth was easy. Dear Santa, the slanting, ropey letters struggled their way uphill and even off the page. I hope you're having a nicer Christmas than we are. My mommy says she is dying, and she always tells the truth. So what I want for Christmas is for her to stop. I hope you can arrange this right away. Let me know if I can help. I'll leave a plate of cookies for you and your reindeer under the tree. Yours truly, Merry Christmas. Love, Leah. I don't know where this came from, but I think it's really neat, Beth said. They probably got it out of someone's tomb or something. Her voice sort of wriggled away at the end of the sentence, and she did not look up. Maybe the store had seminars where guys in plaid sports jackets instructed salespeople on what not to mention. Forget about death and taxes, he would thunder. Death and taxes are no-nos. Beth took off the old-fashioned double-strand pearl choker she was wearing and looked around nervously, as if afraid someone might see what she was doing and disapprove. Denise shook her head. She and Beth were the only ones at the counter. They were alone for all practical purposes. The only significant sound, she did not count the interminable muzak, "You better watch out, you better not cry," was the high-pitched babble of children somewhere in the distance, lining up for Santa, no doubt. Santa must have overslept, probably had a hangover and no kids of his own. Beth dangled the choker over the horse's mouth pendulum fashion and smiled as though she and Denise were friends. No, not friends, co-conspirators. Look, Beth let the choker sink into the horse like a snake charmer's snake collapsing back into itself. See? She smiled at Denise, confidently now, as if she had known Denise all her life. Denise tried not to feel pleased, but couldn't quite manage it. You can put valuables and stuff in it. Beth sighed, upended the horse, and dumped the choker out into her hand. She didn't put it back around her neck, just stared at it as if she weren't sure whose it was, and then shoved it into what was presumably her black handbag, a rabbit, back into the hat. "Thanks for showing me," Denise said, "but I've never really understood the appeal of that." Beth looked at her blankly. "You know, teapots shaped like elephants, pitchers shaped like pigs, so you pour your tea out of a long nose or milk out of a pig's snout." I like things to be useful, though, don't you?" Beth said. She gazed wistfully down at the horse. When Denise looked like that at home, Richard came running with equipment, and a good thing, too. "I think I'm in the wrong department," Beth confided. "I'd quit, but I only got the job last week. Besides, I need the money." "Never mind," Denise told her. "I want to buy the horse. My daughter has a lot of jewelry, and she loves odd containers. You remind me of her, actually. She'll probably like it just fine. If she doesn't, I'll ask my husband to return it, that's all. He's an architect, but semi-retired, so he has time for stuff like that." "Oh." Beth's expression was glazed and guarded now, probably afraid she, Denise, was about to launch into her life story, an X-rated one at that. "Do you want this gift wrap?" Beth asked. "It costs $1 extra." "That's okay," Denise said. "That's okay meaning yes, or that's okay meaning no?" "I'll have it gift wrapped," Denise told her. "Price is no object these days." Beth smiled ruefully. "I wish I could say that." Denise just nodded. She took a cab home, then ruined the ride, the last trip by herself she had promised Richard, the last trip as herself, by evaluating her performance most of the way. True, she had been her all too usual self again. She had not done much for Beth's day or advanced her good opinion of humankind. But she hadn't thrown up or been insulting. She had bought something Leah would like. She had not mentioned anything to do with death or dying, even on cue. She was shaking from the effort any sustained motion now required. She felt feverish, uncoordinated, intoxicated, on the verge of losing it. She knew what Richard would say when he heard how her self-billed, quote, final shopping spree, end quote, had gone. He would lecture her with his arms folded, all the while pacing and looking out the window. He would say, "Was this some damn knick-knack really worth all this?" And she would tell him the truth. Absolutely not. He was an emotional accountant, which made sense from the opposites attract perspective. Denise's mother had once read in a woman's magazine that for each cigarette smoked, one might have to deduct as much as an hour of life. She had spent all day figuring it out and announced to Denise that given her daily quota of nicotine, she had died 4 hours before her birth. Richard would let the matter drop in deference to the fact she was dying. He had always been like that, paying deference to facts. In her situation, he kept saying he would have paced himself, taking long naps and megavitamins. He would have begun an intensive research campaign, trying to find out what was killing him before it did. She didn't care about that. Her efforts, misguided as they obviously were, had been in another direction. She turned the package on her lap. There was no doubt Leah would like the horse. For how long, though? That was the key question with Leah. Maybe it was the key question with everyone. Leah liked everything she got, which was part of being 7 and greedy. She was greedy for gifts, greedy for attention, greedy for truth. But satisfaction paled quickly. She began to think about tombstones again. Leah had come up with a good one. Loving mother and wife of 3. Denise had told Leah the truth about her former husbands, the truth about her cancer, the truth about her dying. Richard said she was being morbid and overtaxing Leah's imagination. Never mind, Denise told herself. Telling the truth is who you are and what you do best. She had Richard's love, but truthfully, she would have liked his approval as well. She had worked in a hospice right up until the time of her own diagnosis, then she quit. Quit before they could ask her to leave, quit before anyone could uncover and wrest from her the one great guilty secret. She was afraid, no, she was terrified of dying. Not of the pain. She had a lifetime of experience in dealing with pain. She was an expert. Not of embarrassment, God knows, the way some women were. Her mother's last efforts had been to keep Denise from knowing the diaper needed changing. She called a breast a bosom and a bowel movement a morning's morning. Not of humiliation or the loss of prowess the way so many men were, wanting to die rather than having to be helped to the bathroom. Not recognizing themselves in the mirror, hating the skeletal stranger who'd come out of their Vic Tanny closet. Denise wasn't afraid of grief either. She knew what grief felt like a knife inside you, a knife that cut you when you moved. But this was ugly and intractable, a monster in her basement, sullen and stupid and deadly. She dreamed she was dying and woke to find her pants wet. Richard accused her of not facing her incontinence. "It's not incontinence," she cried out, forgetting she wasn't supposed to excite herself. A wave of pain hit her, and she reeled back into the bed. "No, well, what is it then?" He stood over her, glowering, throwing down another challenge. And she was equal to it. She told him the truth. "It's fear," she said. "I'm afraid of dying." She'd been a bedwetter all through childhood and even after marriage. Anger was at the bottom of it, they said. Anger was the troll under every bridge. They also said fear and desire were 2 sides of the same coin. Maybe that was what made this fear different. Maybe this coin had no face, no building, just an eagle with arrows in both claws. Richard tried to be kind. He was kind, but he didn't understand. She knew what got to him was the thought of all her wasted effort. Richard's parents had drummed the waste not, want not business into him in a very big way. Come on, Richard, she told him, that proverb is supposed to apply to food. It's about the depression and leftovers. He shook his head. No, he said, it's about everything. Never mind. She more than anyone had benefited from his stubborn, single-focused fidelity. She didn't want to look any gift horse in the mouth. Her thoughts came back to the package in her lap. Richard wasn't waiting for her when she got home. No, of course not. That was part of letting her have one last time on her own. She walked through the front door slowly, her legs already beginning to betray her. From now on, it would be the walker if she was lucky. After that, the wheelchair, then the porta potty, then nothing. She got undressed, looking at every item of clothing, feeling foolish, feeling profound. The dress was difficult to relinquish. She had fished this dress out of the back of her closet, last worn to Leah's kindergarten graduation. What a time that had been. Tiny kids wearing gowns and mortarboards and receiving diplomas, the first of many graduations. Denise had been moved despite herself. The underpants were the worst. Plain white cotton underpants, size 5'6". She never liked to wear underpants when she was sick. Richard had teased her about that in the old days, the days when they were both young and healthy and intent on the gleams in each other's eyes. What would happen to these pants after she died? Would they go to the Goodwill? Would bag ladies paw over them? Would they hold them up to their faces and smell the crotch? Would they catch the scent of death and drop the pants like a hot potato back into the bin? Why did she care? Distraction, even self-distraction, had its limits in the war she was waging. Denise had gone back to the Catholic Church, the church to which she'd converted in college. She'd fasted and gone to early morning mass and taken communion under both hosts, the wafer and the purple juice, but nothing happened to her fear. Going to mass, to Catholicism, was like putting a flower in the dish of a hungry dog. She was afraid of that dog, afraid of death, not of what it would do, not of what she would or wouldn't feel or what people would think. She was afraid of it. She tried channeling, rebirthing, regression, mantras and gurus, analysis and encounter groups, and desensitization, and there the dog was, and there she was, petrified. Might as well expect granite to dissolve with the application of bath water. "Mommy," Leah said in a soft voice from outside the room, "I'm glad you told me about Santa Claus." Or maybe she, Denise, had just imagined it. Maybe truth, like God, could play hide and seek. Denise took her medicine with the last of the bedside water, then hobbled naked down a corridor that lengthened as she went. She sat on the cold toilet, eked out her usual orange trickle, and remembered to flush. She got half of herself into a robe, then hobbled back to the bedroom and crawled into bed. She was lying in the snow outside the church. She moved her arms to make an angel. The priest came and stood over her. The sun was a halo behind his head, and he wasn't mad. "You're a lovely angel," he told her, "a snow angel with red mittens." She didn't want mittens on her hands and began pulling them off with her teeth. She got them off just in time. Richard had come in and was sitting beside her, his white sleeves rolled up in a way that made her resentful and dreamy. She was 12 on a Long Island train, alone in the real world for the first time. A businessman sitting one seat up the aisle from her took his snowy shirt in hand and rolled his cuffs back, exposing a slim but muscular forearm whose thin gold hairs glinted in the sun. Denise, the child, had fantasies then, which Denise, the adult, could not remember, coded as they were in a language she had forgotten. But they had to do with pirates and Douglas Fairbanks Jr., who put her over his shoulder and carried her below decks and did wonderful things to her, things she could hardly allow herself the luxury of imagining. "How was your day?" Richard asked. "Not that great." "Where's Leah?" "She'll be up in a minute." He had the box in his hand. "What'd you get?" He seemed really interested, so Denise unwrapped the parcel with bulky fingers and showed him the horse. He sat on the edge of the bed, turning the horse around in his large, capable hands. It was the first time in a long time he hadn't asked about pain or medication. Richard grinned at her. "Look inside," Denise said. Richard held the horse up to the light, looking. There had been eggs like that once, hadn't there? Eggs made of sugar, bigger than baseball. Eggs you could look into. "This is amazing," Richard said. "I never saw anything like it before. Leah'll be in seventh heaven for at least 5 minutes." Denise struggled upright in the bed. "I want you to have it, Richard." "Me? It's not really my—" He stopped and looked at her. "I know. It's not really your kind of thing. I bought it for Leah." Denise could hear her voice steeplechasing over the words, trying to get everything said before she ran out of breath. "But Leah's got lots of knickknacks, and maybe sometimes people should get things that aren't them, so they—" "I don't know. It made you grin, anyway. I haven't seen you grin in a long time." Richard grinned again. "Well," he said, still turning the horse in his hands, "I don't know what to say." "You love me, don't you?" Denise said, sliding away from him onto a pond. The pond was made of ice so pure you could see your face in it. Your face as you wanted to see it. Your face as it once had been. She skated back to Richard, who was waiting for her, the gift horse in his hands. "You can always say you love me if it's true." Richard bent over and kissed her on the forehead. "I love you if it's true, Denise." She was in the middle of a forest where all the trees were men in black suits, and all the leaves were crows. Suddenly she found a clearing, and in the clearing was a host of wolves, and Leah was with her, holding her hand, looking cold and scared. She, Denise, would throw herself down, and the wolves would devour her, and she felt their hot breath on her face, and she wanted that to be the last, but far in the distance she heard a child calling, and she knew who it was. She roused herself again. "Hi there, sweetie. I bought you a horse." Her own voice was a long string disappearing around a corner. She followed it. "I gave it to your dad because it made him grin." "Mommy," Leah said, "do I have to leave you alone now?" Denise rolled her head side to side to say no. She wanted to tell Leah that Mommy was a plate of chocolate chip cookies warm from the oven, and alone was a glass of fresh cold milk, and nothing could be better than to have them together. "Are my eyes red?" Leah asked. "Do I look like I've been crying?" Denise roused Denise and looked. There sat her beautiful daughter, clear blue eyes, the evidence of tears. Her bangs fell below her brows. She needed a haircut. Spun gold crescents lay on the barbershop floor. Only there weren't barber shops anymore, just poles spinning red and white in the dark December woods, where Snow White and Briar Rose went riding, riding, followed by wolves who were whiter than snow. "Mommy," Leah said, "I have a confession to make. I said I was glad you told me about Santa Claus, but I wasn't. I wasn't glad at all. Can you forgive me?" She had fallen off the world and the trees were cold, but Leah was calling and deserved an answer. The darkness halted and the wolves fell back. Denise opened her eyes. Leah was sitting on the bed, holding her hand and looking worried. "Here you are, Mommy," she said with a quivering smile. "Can you forgive me?" Denise moved a little in the line. The man ahead of her took a gun out of a cigar box. He smiled to her and bowed, then took the gun, put it to his mouth, and blew the trigger. There was no noise, just a red explosion of silence. It was Denise's turn. She had peed in her pants again. Her mother would be furious. She was cold and wet, and something awful was about to happen. She found Leah's hand stranded. "There's nothing to forgive." Leah looked at her, big blue eyes round with fear and fear's attendants. "Are you afraid of dying, Mommy?" And it was Leah with the gun in her hand. Denise wanted to tell her the truth, but the truth wouldn't make her free. Only love could do that. And the truth was fear. But all her life had been leading to this, and love labored and brought forth a beautiful lie. And she nurtured the lie and breathed what was left of her life into it, because there was no betrayal when it came to Leah. There was only Leah, and Leah would believe her, and the lie would help her, would light a way for her in darkness where the truth would not. And she, Denise, would give Leah this life, this lie, and under cold evergreen branches she found a plate of warm cookies meant for reindeer. "Oh, sweetie," she said, "I got to love you. I'm not afraid of anything at all." A gang of blackbirds lifted from the forest and flew away screaming, "True, true, true." No one managed to hear them. Thank you for listening.